Welcome to the pharmaphorum podcast. This is web editor Nicole Raleigh, and today I have with me Paul Bridges, President of Consulting at Parexel, and Charlotte Moser, who is Parexel's Chief Medical Officer. Welcome both.
Hi, nice to speak to you.
So Parexel is a leading global clinical research organization, or CRO, providing insights-driven clinical and consulting solutions to the world's life sciences industry. Originally, pharmaphorum was due to speak with Parexel at Bio Europe Spring, but happily, one might say, things got a little busy. So I want to kick off today's conversation both with a brief look back to Lisbon, and I was wondering if you could share what the energy around Bio Europe Spring was like this year, what the key talking points were.
Yeah, so from my standpoint, I was really happy to see a mood of optimism had returned to the room. Previous sessions, previous years, there was a fixation on funding and trying to secure that. And that had shifted definitely to how do we spend the money that is now moving into our sector. And so for me, that was the big win of the session was we're now in execution mode once more, which is, it's felt like it's been a couple of years since we really were in that sort of mindset. I don't know how you felt, Charlotte.
No, I can completely echo that. However, on the execution role, there was still a lot about questions. How can we do this more cost effectively as well as faster, right? So instead of, oh, we do not have the money yet, and there the conversation stopped, it was all about, okay, we have partly the money or probably the money. How can we go stepwise to success? And are there different models or places where we can go to end up successfully, but with a different budget?
Thank you both. So you actually both mentioned this sort of execution mode. And Paul, I believe you moderated a panel, Innovation Cliff to Execution Edge, Smarter, Faster Biotech in Europe, on Europe's biotech sector facing an innovation cliff with fewer clinical starts, tighter capital, and increasing development complexity. So I was wondering if you could tell us how that went.
Well, it went really quite well. I'm horribly biased, of course, but most of the chairs seemed occupied and they remained in the room. So I was very pleased. I think it was compliments to the panel, really, that I was blessed with. The session really validated what we set out to explore, and that is specifically that Europe really doesn't have a science problem. It has a get it right early out of the gate problem. We heard from investors and biotech leaders on the panel who confirmed what our own consulting experts have been seeing, and that's specifically the companies that are winning funding and getting the partnerships right are now the ones, somewhat to Charlotte's earlier point, that are making the sharper strategic choices up front so that they can enable flawless execution, right? So it's tighter, smarter decision-making, earlier, more integrated decisions that de-risk drug development, attract investment, and move more rapidly through the variety of challenges that all developers face. So it was a great panel and a lot of alignment around those points. We had some success and some celebration, celebrating some notable European funding wins and some successes around European developed products as well on the panel. So real-time breaking news that really endorsed the feeling of optimism in the room. So yeah, it was a high energy, nice session. I enjoyed it.
Great to hear that, Paul. So I just want to tunnel down into the strategic choices that you mentioned a moment ago. So when it comes to regulatory strategy and evolving policy shifts and the challenges you also mentioned, as well as early strategic planning to improve fundability and outcomes for biotechs, what should be the key considerations? What can you share with our listeners?
Yeah, so from my standpoint, and Charlotte is very well placed to discuss, so intimate with customers around the world. But from my standpoint, at least, sponsors increasingly need and want, happily, integrated support that connects the variety of disciplines in our sector. So connecting regulatory, clinical design, competitive landscape differentiation, reimbursement, market access, and regional expansion choices. These previously were somewhat siloed decision points. And now sponsors looking at that flawless execution plan really need to align all of those as they move forwards. And regulatory, again, expressing a little bit personal bias as responsible for regulatory at Parexel, regulatory is sort of the glue that makes that happen in front of regulators and key decision makers who are most able to influence the pace of moving forward. So integrated development planning, I think, is key. And happily, most sponsors now recognize that.
Yeah, I can add there the role of data, right? Because the startups has not stopped, although the funding arena was thin, right? So the survivors come with very solid data, preclinical, but even clinical data back to the investors table, and just work to the advantage with that data is really important. How help them to pitch actually the real exciting solid data they have in the right way. So there is kind of a natural selection who have gone through over the last years, but leaving that point not only in front of the agencies, but also in front of investors with the data they actually collected. It is a very important step, right? And I think as a CRO, helping shape clients their vocabulary and their pitch to the different people is very important too. I was really blown away by some of the data they were shared with me, although they were not starting to their next steps yet, right? But this is really fascinating if they will do so.
Thank you both. So, if we go into the source of that data and talk about trials and trial design specifically, Charlotte, I was wondering if you could answer my next question, which is focused on trial design and execution. Just how important is patient centricity here as regards embedding patient perspectives with clinical perspectives early on for better trial execution?
Yeah, I think it comes down to more specific patients population as well, and does not have to be always under the acronym of rare disease, but really have the right patient population brings that angle more narrow to find them, and just have the help of patient associations and routes of patients and families themselves can really boost enrollment of the whole program to have a quicker but also more directed targeted audience for your study is key. And of course, as a medical translating that importance to certain clients coming from preclinical or life science background is very, very important. How we actually can use patient input to find our subjects for the studies, as well as then test how we're going to do that study in terms of burden we ask of the patients and families is very, very important for the end feasibility of doing that study.
Thank you. So you were talking there about that patient input point to find patients to recruit into the studies, and you also mentioned targeting. And now, when we have multiple conversations, certainly at pharmaphorum, when we hear targeting, we hear also AI. So I was wondering if both of you wanted to share with listeners your respective thoughts on AI and drug development, and indeed medical leadership in drug development today and tomorrow.
Yeah, happy to do so. I busted myself from the panel moderating by using the word AI and when nobody else had, and it was a rare occurrence that the AI was so little mentioned on our panel, but was all over the room, and is probably the hot trending phrase right now in our space, and it has every right to be. For me, the near-term benefit of AI is faster, better outputs that then inform that de-risking that you need to do as a developer, as an R&D lead, in informing a better integrated plan so that you can execute flawlessly. Now, the contention comes because there's an expectation that it drives immediate cost cuts, and that's really not necessarily the case. We hold out hope that that will drive efficiency, that will increase cost saving, of course, but in the near-term gains that we're seeing is smarter decision making, more information, more readily available, that really de-risks the decision making process, and time savings, and time that can be translated therefore ultimately into earlier market access, unlocking revenue sooner without compromising quality. And if you can combine that with a narrative around the de-risked asset itself, that's very compelling to investors at the earliest phases. So the smart sponsors are using AI to inform decisions, and then using it to illustrate value at earlier points, and really attracting attention that supercharges their drug development. And that's the most exciting aspect of it, not necessarily the cost saving opportunity in the near term. That will come, we're confident about it, but smarter, more integrated decision making is what it's driving in the near term.
Yeah, maybe give the example of the rare disease. If you need 50 subjects for a study, right, and you have the modeling of using the data where to find them faster, you still have to do the test on 50 subjects, right? That cost will not be taken away. But instead of using 3 years to have them enrolled and found, right, you can use models to be smarter and much faster to have your overall 50 subject answers.
Yeah, and I'll give you another example, again, expressing my own bias as a head of regulatory. We've adopted within Parexel a technology that enables us to author and compile IND, investigational new drug applications, using AI. And what took a large team 3 months on average to author, compile, and publish and send to the FDA now takes half the time. Right now, that doesn't mean that we're submitting with half the cost. What we're able to do is use that time to storyboard, de-risk, compile a smarter, more targeted and focused submission that clears the obstacles of FDA more readily. That's the value proposition. With that time saving, our experts within the consulting division have more time to de-risk that. And less friction into FDA right now, we would argue, is very, very important in this time of much change going on in the agency. So an example where the strategic benefit way outweighs the cost benefit in the near term. And in a world where every day saved, some folks estimate generates $1 million of revenue for the average asset, that far exceeds the cost benefit of the saving of a month and a half. I hope that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. So faster, better outputs, time savings, de-risking, this repeated notion of flawless execution come from this. It brings me to my final question. Do either of you have any closing thoughts on, as you were just sort of leaning towards then, Paul, the current shifting landscape for industry from this year into the next and beyond?
Firstly, Europe is productive, is engaged, and is driving innovation. And I think that's an important takeaway from the conference overall. And silos are being taken down in drug development and drug discovery. We used to hand the baton of drug development around from regulatory to clinical to market access. Now all of those stakeholders are around one table, and it's driving a much more informed and de-risking process. And I'm excited by that. So, and regulatory particularly is at the heart of that.
Yeah, and I think not only silos, also borders. So you see European initiatives, but ending up doing studies in Australia or China or elsewhere. So there's also more grasp as well as utilization of other agencies outside Europe, and less fear to do so. Really looking for those efficiencies and trade-offs, which brings that to a global effort, right? Which is important to support and see growing, especially when we speak about 2027 and beyond.
Wonderful. Thank you both for your time today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that concludes another episode of the pharmaphorum podcast. You can find more information about this episode, including a download link and information about previous installments at pharmaphorum.com/podcasts. The pharmaphorum podcast is also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, Pocket Casts, Podbean, and pretty much wherever else you download your other podcasts from. Just search for pharmaphorum and follow and hit subscribe. Of course, don't forget to visit our website itself, where you can sign up for daily and weekly news and analysis bulletins. And do follow us on Blue Sky and LinkedIn at pharmaphorum. That's all for now. Thank you for listening.